Well, we have a unique perspective on Iraq now, this with some ties to another controversial war, that being Vietnam. Quan X Pham is the author of A Sense of Duty, My Father, My American Journey. It is a memoir about his service in the U.S. Marine Corps and his father's time as a pilot for the South Vietnamese military, and he is here to share his experience and thoughts on Iraq right now. Quan F. Pham, want to thank you for joining us. Do appreciate your time.
Good morning, Alex from California. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, my home state of California. It's good to see the nice weather there. So, Quan, you know, you share an amazing story in this book. You talk about your early years in South Vietnam where you were born. So tell us about how you first came to the United States and about your father.
Well, the first Americans I met in Vietnam were military advisors like the ones that are training the Iraqis now. They were helping my father and the South Vietnamese fight the Vietnam War. We got out, my family and my sisters and I got out during the fall of Saigon, but my father was captured and went into the re-education camp for 12 years.
12 years, and where's your father? I mean, getting out of that? He was able to get out of that 12 years later?
Well, it was the aftermath of the Vietnam War that we don't like to talk about in this country, the boat people, the exodus, as well as our allies. My father was kept for 12 years, a lot longer than most American prisoners, but thankfully under President Reagan, he was allowed to come over, and he passed away in 2000.
Yes, well, as we turn now to Iraq, I want to get what you make of the current situation going on there.
Well, we just saw a report put out by 10 distinguished Americans who took 9 months to hash out a 3-year-old war, and now we're going to give the Iraqi allies 1 year and American advisors 60 to 90 days to train. That's an incredible timeline. And it looks a lot like Vietnamization, the period when we turned the war over to the South Vietnamese back in the 70s.
Now, you go further on that. Explain what you mean by that, the Vietnamization or Vietnamization of this. What do you mean?
Well, when President Nixon came into office in '69, there was a war. There was a plan to end the war, get the Americans out, turn the war over to the South Vietnamese, and have what we call a peace with honor. We signed the agreement with the North Vietnamese. We received our American prisoners of war like John McCain back, and then Congress proceeded to cut off aid to the South Vietnamese, and we washed our hands of Southeast Asia and abandoned an ally on the battlefield.
All right, so then what do you think President Bush should be doing regarding Iraq?
Well, first of all, I don't think he should accept all the recommendations by the Iraqi study group report. The advisory effort is very complicated. It's very complicated, and we're sending advisors over with 60 days of training. If we have advisors who are experts, I would like to see them in the American military first, prove themselves before we pretend that we're going to help out an ally. Secondly, we shouldn't stay there too long. I've been writing about this for over a year. We micromanaged the South Vietnamese all the way to the end of the war.
And what do you think are the closest comparisons that you see between Iraq and Vietnam? Talk about those.
Number one, a lot of people have talked about losing in Vietnam. I beg to differ. The United States did not lose in Vietnam. We quit. The South Vietnamese lost the war. And when you lose a war, you lose your family, you lose your country, you lose your culture, you lose everything. We quit in Vietnam. We're not going to lose in Iraq. We may quit and leave and come home, but we're going to have a country, the United States, intact. It's the poor Iraqis and all the Americans who have passed away in Iraq, and their sacrifices will be in vain if we don't do this right. And it's part of the American value that I treasure so much, and that's responsibility and empathy and our American credibility as an ally is at stake here. And
Quan, President Bush this week called the current situation in Iraq, said it's a bad one, but the president also said the U.S. will prevail in Iraq. So how would you define success in Iraq, and do you really believe it's even possible at this point?
Well, those questions that I used to say in the Marine Corps are over my head. The administration needs to define what that means. Is that a free Iraq without U.S. support? Is that a free Iraq where the refugees, 1.6 million Iraqis have already left the country, could come back to? Unlike the South Vietnamese, 3 million of us left and we've never returned. I think the administration needs to define what success means so that the American soldier on the ground can execute the mission.
Quan X Pham, I want to thank you for weighing in, the author of A Sense of Duty, My Father, My American Journey. I'm sure your father would be very, very proud of this book and of your time with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
We're approaching